UFC 242 is in the books from Abu Dhabi, and still undefeated, and still the undisputed lightweight champion Khabib Nurmagomedov. I am Brett Okamoto, joined by my partner bantamweight Dominick Cruz, and one of the brightest minds in the game, which is good because I got a tough question for you, Dom. How in the world do you beat Khabib Nurmagomedov? I think after this masterful performance, yet another one, how is anybody going to beat this guy?
Honestly, I don't have all the answers, obviously, but from my experience, what I see in matchups against Khabib so far, it's been you have to come from a grappling background before you add the rest, because that is where you'll make them. You won't make as many of the little mistakes. You'll have the answers for the foot sweeps. You'll have the answers for the leg positioning. If he does get the foot sweep, you land in a position where you have an underhook, and then you have an option to get up. The little tiny nuances that Khabib uses, these guys that come from a striking background, you can't fill those gaps in a couple years in MMA or even 10 years in MMA. I mean, he's got 20 years of grappling behind him, and you can't make that up in a few years. You have to spend a lifetime in it to keep up with Khabib in the grappling.
Yeah, one of the things that impressed me about Khabib in this fight is not just all of the grappling that you just mentioned, but his ability to mesh it well with his striking, mesh it well with what he's doing on the feet. You know, sometimes you see these dominant wrestlers and they're just putting their heads down and they're going at it. When I watched Khabib in that first round, you know, he's not just putting his head down and walking forward. His shots, they're explosive, they're well-timed, and anytime Dustin Poirier would throw some hands and then take a deep breath and get his bearings a little bit, Khabib was right back on his hip. So it's the full package. It's almost like the George St. Pierre effect, and it's perfect timing.
Well, I think St. Pierre uses way more striking to set up his grappling than Khabib has. Khabib hasn't even been... he didn't get one of his takedowns stuffed. Not one. And he's not really setting them up. He's setting them up by completing one, by shooting so quickly that the guys can't time it, and they're square by the time he gets in on them.
Yeah.
And then once he gets to the fence, that's where I really see the difference for him. The way that he mixes in the trips with the upper body grappling, the way that he gets behind both arms and doesn't allow the 50-50 split, the over-under. He doesn't give this position ever. You never see him here. And most guys in the grappling on the fence, you see this, over-under. He doesn't ever give that because it's 50-50. He shucks it by. He gets behind both arms. And once your hands are here and he's behind you, you can't get him off. He transitions flawlessly with the trips. It's like having an angle and striking for him. Once he has that angle in the grappling, you're just sinking in quicksand, and then you're carrying all his weight. And the beginning of carrying his weight, he makes you carry it and doesn't let off, and that's what wears you down. That's why it only takes 3 rounds sometimes for him to get these finishes. It's not that these guys aren't in shape. It's not that Dustin Poirier made mistakes, that he's not good. He is a world-class athlete, and he is unbelievable. And almost anybody else in the world, it doesn't look like that.
Yeah.
But Khabib makes it look easy because of the way that he mixes his feet in with his upper body grappling. It's not just one at a time. And there's only few guys in the world that mix the judo in with the Greco and the freestyle all in one, and he's one of them.
Okay, well, let's talk about potentially his next opponent. I think you want to see Tony Ferguson. I think I want to see Tony Ferguson. Plenty of people want to see him. Why? I mean, beyond the 12-fight win streak, what do you see, Dom and Tony, that makes you think that that's a matchup that could look different even a little bit than some of Khabib's, the rest of his fights?
People might not like hearing this, but I think he's just kind of crazy enough to not care. And also, he's so creative. The way that he strikes, it's not with rhyme or reason, it's with flow. It's like he's never really throwing a 1-2 and then coming back. It's like a 1-2 to a shot, to a roll, to everything flows continuously into the scramble, into the submission, into creating space again, and then back into pressure. He creates a lot of pressure, and I think you got to keep Khabib on his heels. You have to keep him back a little bit. You have to push him back a little. And we haven't really seen that out of anybody yet because they're so worried about the speed of that shot and the explosiveness of the overhand and the explosiveness of the uppercut that everything looks the same with Khabib. So you have to have that wrestling background and confidence that I can wrestle with him even if he gets in on me. And Tony has that.
Does it make you nervous at all, a guy like Tony, because he's so wild that he almost is willing to put himself off balance? And I guess that makes me a little trepidatious in knowing that a guy who's willing to put himself off balance, because once Khabib gets a guy down, they don't get back up. And so is that a little bit too risky? Does that give you any concern with a Tony Ferguson matchup?
Well, that's where it comes down to what was Tony Ferguson's first martial art? It was wrestling. It was grappling. So that's where that gap gets filled, where we haven't seen that yet. Khabib hasn't faced not anybody to that level that has the striking mixed into it, plus the submission arts. So Tony does a good job with the wrestling, but adding the submissions like a catch wrestling to where right when Khabib shoots, you notice that guillotine position that Dustin Poirier had.
Right.
Now, Khabib gets that guillotine. He can use it to at least create space and create a striking battle again, whereas Dustin that was his Hail Mary. That's why he kept with it. And the way that Khabib was able to flip his hips side to side, it created the space he needed. And it looked like he's given position, but he didn't. He was creating space just so he could get air and let Dustin blow his arms out. And at the end of that, Dustin had nothing left, and that's why the choke went in. Yep. Khabib feels that. You grapple with guys long enough to feel that when you're in practice, that you know when guys start breaking. And Khabib feels that. And Tony has endless cardio, and there's just something in there that doesn't allow him to get tired or really care if he's losing. He could be down 4 rounds to nothing, right, I believe, and he still believes with all his heart that he'll win in the 5th. And there's not a lot of people that are wired that way, in my opinion.
Or intimidated, I think, or down. You lose some of that momentum when you're facing somebody like Khabib that's taking you down. Well, Dustin Poirier had 2 moments in this fight, I think. You mentioned one of them with the guillotine. The other one was early in the 2nd round, clipped him with a right shot, really followed up aggressively. Was there anything that you saw there? Was there anything that Dustin should have done differently? Was there anything that we learned about either one of those guys in that brief exchange?
No, in fact, Khabib did the perfect thing. He got on his bike and basically ran. And that's when you're rocked and everything's spinning when you're in that state. And I'm sure things were spinning for Khabib a little bit. And he kept moving, and you just run for your life until things stop spinning. And then when things stop spinning, Dustin was doing everything right. He was trying for the finish. He was throwing heat. He knew he had that chance to get him out of there, and he went for it. I can't say one thing that I would have done different if I was Dustin Poirier in that fight, other than use what grappling knowledge I have in those predicted areas that you can't, in those areas that you can't predict against Khabib. You have to just make adjustment and trust in your instincts. And if you don't have the grappling base to instinctually stuff takedowns that Khabib's putting together, he's putting 2-3 moves together. You have to be ahead of that or with that in order to keep up with them. And if you don't come from a grappling background, you just don't have that.
Co-main event. We'll stay with the lightweight division. Edson Barboza facing Paul Felder. You were right here, 5 feet away from the action. It was a terrific fight. How did Paul Felder win that fight? And afterwards, he's saying, hey, no one can run from me anymore. Is he correct? Is Paul Felder getting those big fights after this performance?
I hope so. When you see somebody get chopped, when you see 2 guys just put their body out there like that and just keep walking forward, you never really saw Paul Felder say, ouch, I'm going to take a step back. You saw him say, ouch, I'm going to keep going forward. I better, or else it's going to get worse. Again, that is a different level of human being. I'm telling you right now. I'm watching this fight, and that was painful to watch.
Yeah.
And he marched through everything, and he did what he had to do. And it was close. It was razor close. And that's why I can't be mad at the decision. Barboza could be mad maybe his coaches, but it's like when these fights are that razor close, stand up for stand up, it's hard to say. It is. But I think that Paul Felder does deserve a shot against a Conor McGregor, does deserve a shot against one of these bigger names because he's just laid his body out on the line. He went back and got a loss back, and he's still here. And he's got a big face. He's everywhere right now.
Talking about a guy who spent some time in the hospital after his last fight for a collapsed lung, but was still around giving interviews that night before he went to the hospital. Pretty tough guy there in Paul Felder.
Exactly my point.
Another tough guy, fighting next weekend in Vancouver, main event, UFC Fight Night, Justin, the highlight Gaethje, taking on Donald Cowboy Cerrone. Dom, there's a billion different ways you could go with this fight. For me personally, I've called it a fighter's fight. I, as a media member, would like to see this fight. Fans would like to see this fight, but I feel like fighters on the UFC roster, this is the type of fight that they want to tune in. What are your thoughts on Gaethje versus Cowboy?
Well, nobody loses in the world. That's like watching Felder versus Barboza, in my opinion. Yep. When you watch that matchup, you know that, ouch, somebody's getting hurt, somebody's getting hit, somebody's bleeding, somebody's getting knocked out. And if that doesn't happen, then their legs are going to get chopped off with kicks. It's going to be serious damage and serious business in that matchup with 2 of the toughest human beings, some of the toughest human beings out there that really want to take damage and show what they can do and break you even if you damage them. That they take pride in that, both of these guys. And the durability of both of them and the cardio. And then also, more than anything, I love the aspect of Donald Cerrone's ground game to that. You haven't seen a lot of guys where Gaethje takes down and can really, really threaten Gaethje, and I think that Cerrone is one of those people that can threaten anybody off of his back at any time. I've seen him since the WC days submit incredible grapplers, and I don't see a lot of difference in a matchup with Gaethje.
One real quick thing I want to ask you about that matchup is this is Cowboy's 4th fight this year, and this is something that we talk about Cowboy all the time, but 4th fight, we're only in September. He's 3 months away from getting his eye closed against Tony Ferguson. You know what it takes to go through these camps and then get back into a 5-round fight. Any concern on Cowboy Cerrone, just activity?
Concern, no, but I mean, I wouldn't. I would rather him have a little break before I see that fight personally, so we could see the best matchup. I mean, 4 fights in a year is heavy. 3 fights in a year is about on target if they're 3-round fights. 3 title fights in a year, 3 5-round fights, even if it's not for a title, is heavy. That's a heavy pace year.
Yep.
So for him to go 4 rounds or 4 fights in a year is, that's that's what, 12 rounds?
Yeah.
So it's like 9 rounds, it's hard.
It is what he does, though. It's nothing new for Cowboys.
It's just a lot. He's taking a lot of damage, and it does add up. And who's to say that if he doesn't have that 4th fight in a year that he can't show up a little better?
Sure.
A little bit more fresh. But he likes to stay busy, and I can't really contest that with Cowboy, ever.
Well, let's put a bow on this lightweight division. We have Khabib Nurmagomedov, dominant performance tonight, obviously. Dustin Poirier, he's still going to be right there in the mix. I don't think that this sends him down the ladder too far. You got Tony Ferguson in the wings waiting. Conor McGregor always looms large. Next week, Gaethje versus Cowboy. How do you see this playing out, Dom? I mean, you've been watching this sport for a long time. Where are we sitting, 6 months, 1 year from now? How do you see it playing out?
Well, like I said, I wouldn't mind seeing Conor versus a Paul Felder, 2 strikers. I wouldn't mind seeing Conor versus the winner of Gaethje and Cerrone. But no matter what, the one fight that the MMA community needs to see is Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Tony Ferguson, in my opinion. I mean, I just can't see anybody else that really. I mean, he's on a 10-fight win streak or something?
Yeah, he's up to 11 or 12.
11 or 12. Yeah. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yep.
And he's got the title.
Oh,
Give
no, you know what? I think you're
shot.
right. Max Holloway was 12. I think. Well, Tony might be 11 though. Actually, we're
in a roundabout
splitting
dozen.
hairs.
Okay.
10, 11, 12.
And
yes.
he's got the title. So,
And it sounds like Khabib wants to fight him, which
it
I
needs
love
to happen.
to hear.
It really does for the MMA community, for everybody. That fight needs to happen, in my opinion.
Last piece of news: we're all getting ready to come to the arena, see this great event, UFC 242. A little bit of news came out. Nate Diaz fighting Jorge Masvidal. Main event, UFC 244, November 2nd, Madison Square Garden. What do you think about Nate and George? These are 2 guys we've seen fight for a very long time. So I know you haven't been studying the film lately, but you're probably pretty familiar with them. What are your early thoughts on that fight?
With Nate and Masvidal, the way that once you said I hadn't watched any film, I was like, hold on a second. Nate and Masvidal, the thing about that matchup is they usually get into people's heads before they even get in there, and I can't see them really baffling each other. It's just going to be like 2 people just like, yeah, F you, no F you.
Yeah.
And they're just staring, and so you're actually just going to see the pure fight for what it is. The kicks and the way that Masvidal uses his range and just the way that he stays composed and doesn't really lose a lot of energy, I think that's a really, really interesting matchup for Diaz, because Diaz puts the pressure. He just keeps beating your body down, keeps you on your heels, and you can't really get him off you. I don't know if he can do that to a big Masvidal with the type of crisp strikes that he has and the way that he times things.
Yeah.
And he doesn't waste energy either. He's very composed, very good defense, extreme veteran in the sport. I've gotten the pleasure of training with both Nate Diaz and Masvidal, and they're both just unbelievable. I've been doing this a long time, and these guys have been doing it as long as me, so it's crazy.
Well, it's such a good matchup. There's not a title on the line, well, at least an official UFC title, but it's such an exciting matchup. They had to make it a main event so we could get that 25 minutes. That can't be a 15-minute fight. We are out of time. Great night of fights here at UFC 242, and Khabib Nurmagomedov, if he's not the #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world, he is darn close after this performance against Dustin Poirier. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For more sports and analysis, download the ESPN app. And for live streaming and special content, subscribe to ESPN+.